I'm standing in front of a church. Not just any church, Leeds Parish Church. Today, it stands as a Grade 1 listed building and a reminder of Leeds' Victorian and industrial past. In its records lies another reminder of that industrial past. In 1842, a group of men were elected to be church wardens here. They were Chartists. The moral force Chartists of Leeds had sought electoral success in the general election of 1841, but to no avail. However, as early as 1840, John Jackson, a colleague of Joshua Hobson, had been elected to Leeds' Improvement Commission. By January 1842, Jackson had been joined by a raft of Chartist list candidates who had defeated both the Whig and Tory lists. It is perhaps unsurprising that within months, the Improvement Commission cancelled further elections and moved to a system of appointments.
The local elections were still a year away, and the Chartists wished to continue their electoral success. The very fact that they contested and won the elections for the parish's church wardens speaks volumes about Chartism's symbiotic and multifaceted relationship with Christianity. Evidence of many aspects of this relationship can be found in this forgotten Chartist success.
Christianity has played an important part in British dissent for centuries. Terry Eagleton, in his Marxist commentary on the Gospels, was far from the first man to suggest that Jesus Christ was some kind of revolutionary. The image of a powerful orator descending upon religious buildings and driving out those who would profit from man's relationship with God, the story of Jesus and the money changers in the temple, was extremely popular with the Chartists, just as it had been with the Levellers before them.
To the Chartists, the money changers of their time were the bishops and vicars of the Church of England. Anti-disestablishmentarianism is usually only discussed today in the context of very high scores in Scrabble, but in the 19th century it had a clear meaning. To be an anti-disestablishmentarian was to be opposed to the disestablishmentarians, of whom many were Chartists. Their aim was the disestablishment of the Church of England. The Church being part of the apparatus of state was an abomination to many Chartists. As much as they wanted to remove the Church from the state by getting rid of tithes and bishops that wielded political power, they also wanted to remove the state from the Church. The very purpose of worship, to become close to God and achieve salvation, was undermined in disestablishmentarian eyes by the presence of a corrupt, landowning and unjust established Church. The fact that Chartists stood as church wardens in the same year that they sought to become elected as local councillors should tell you enough about the equivalent power the parish had at this time. Their electoral success, therefore, may have been bittersweet. However, not all Chartists were disestablishmentarians, although there was a great deal of overlap, and disestablishment was not, after all, one of the 6 points. The concept of the Church as a tool to oppress rather than enrich is something that I'll be talking about later on when I look at the ideals of Chartist churches. But it was consistent with historical British radicalism. Like the Levellers, the Chartists despised the Norman yoke and the obstacle of William the Bastard's nobility that had been placed between Englishmen and English land. To further follow Stedman Jones's logic, the same can be said for the imposition of an established church, serving the interests of the purses of the rich rather than the souls of the poor. Stedman Jones may have based this on a great deal of source material that in fact predates Chartism, but the point remains sound. The continuity between this radical understanding of history and the Christian roots of Chartism should not be understated. Just as the nobility got in the way of the people and their land, the Church had come to stand in the way of the people and their God. In Ernest Jones' Chartist hymn, The Blackstone Age Gathering, a future with no cold roof twixt God and man is foretold with hope. Eileen Yeo reminds us that the Chartists were quick to preach that biblical opposition to the ruling classes was not something that began with Christ. The Old Testament prophets had pointed to princes, rulers, and unjust employers as usurpers of the rights of labour and the poor, they noted. To this constitutional roll call was added the base, brutal, and bloody Whigs.
However, the relevance of Christianity's early period Chartism has been disputed. Apart from some joint involvement in the cause of disestablishing the Church and Chartism itself, there was little overlap between Charter and Christ. It was only after the twin controversies of 1839, the petition's failure, and the arrest of Joseph Rayner Stevens, that a greater overlap came to the fore.
Against the wishes of O'Connor, Lovett and others responded to these events with the so-called New Move, which was not just about church Chartism by any means. Chase, however, disagrees with Yeo and tells us that it is a misnomer to count church Chartism as anything new as of 1839. He writes that Chartism was already by this point generally imbued with the vision of a radical social gospel. The story of Stevens, from his rejection of his Wesleyan upbringing to the manner in which Chartists nationwide collected money for his defence fund, is a definite upping of the ante, however, for Chartist Christianity. Not that I'm trying to directly disagree with Malcolm on this one. That would be folly of the highest order. Speaking of folly, here's me coming down some stairs and getting very excited.
The very language of Chartism, a lexicon of missionaries, sacred months and jubilees, was peppered with evidence of this religious heritage. To us in the 21st century, the language of liberation takes its cues from the Spanish Civil War, Martin Luther King and V for Vendetta. To the radicals of the 19th century, however, these cues came from religion. It was just as potent then for O'Connor to stand up and proclaim that he had led his people from Egypt, or for men to declare the Charter as their creed, as it is for victims of oppression today to cry, "No pasarán." But the presence of religious ideas in Chartist thought extended beyond mere expressions of defiance. Songs of celebration were known as Chartist hymns. When one imagines them echoing from the choir stalls here, it's easy to see why.
O'er plains and cities far away, all lorn and lost, the morning lay, when sunk the sun at break of day, in smoke of mill and factory, but waved the wind on Blackstone height, a standard of the broad sunlight, and sung that morn with trumpet might, a sounding song of liberty, and grew the glorious music high, when pouring with his heart on fire, old Yorkshire came and Lancashire, and all its noblest chivalry, the men who give, not those who take, the hands that bless, yet hearts that break, those toilers for their foemen's sake, are England's true noble.
This is, of course, highly anachronistic. Although Chartists were once church wardens in this very building, it's highly unlikely that such insurrectionary hymns ever bounced off these rafters. More to the point, the Chartists, with their strong views on disestablishment, would have rather sing these songs from a jail cell than in the presence of the churchman's distant blasphemy. And finally, there was the simplest relationship of all, to Chartists. Chartism was Christianity put into practice.
The principle here is obvious. Chartists believed that if they, as O'Connor regularly put it, got their charter, a nation full of men loving their neighbours, helping the poor and feeding the hungry would result. The Northern Star on the 20th of November 1841 said, "All Chartists who are Christians agree that the principles of Chartism are those of Christianity, that they form the practical exhibition and development of the grand law of love on which the Lord has declared the whole law and the prophets to hang. Therefore, just as Chartist rhetoric was steeped in biblical language, its ideas were rooted in Christian morality." The most fascinating product of this is the idea of Chartist Christianity itself. To quote the Chartist Circular in March 1840, "In every district there ought to be a Chartist church planted for the benefit of Chartist families. It may be a private house, a school, or a public hall, tended by an association for public meetings, education, and religious worship. And every Sabbath day a gospel should be preached in it by a religious, honest missionary, chosen by the Chartists." Elements of Congregationalism and other nonconformist branches of Christianity can be found in this new model posed by the Chartists. The purpose of the Chartist Church would be to educate as well as preach, to engage in public meetings as well as prayer. This was the Christianity the Chartists fought for. Compare this with how out of place a man Robert Lowry spoke to felt in his own local church in 1856. I remember well one intelligent working man with a large family relating to me how he had been imposed on by his employer, who was a member of the same church with him. "I wish we could establish a chapel for ourselves," he said. "I strive all I can to banish ill feeling from my mind towards him, but often when I have seen him in the church, and have sat down at the Lord's table with him whom I know to be defrauding me and other labourers of our hire, I could not help feeling bitterly, and that I would be better away at such a time." Like Leeds Parish Church's election of church wardens in 1842, this was not a unique occurrence, but a highly representative one. The distaste for the established church and its catering for the rich, and the hypocrisy of organised Christianity and its restrictions come pouring out from this labourer's mouth, and the need for a Chartist Christianity becomes evident. To summarise then, let's go back to me taking myself far too seriously and trying to read lines off a laptop without anyone noticing.
And so we return then to the election of church wardens to Leeds Parish Church in 1842.
In a year that carries so much relevance for Chartists, it is fitting that all the strands of the Chartist relationship with Christianity should be so neatly entwined in a single local affair. The Christian roots and righteousness of Chartism is represented here by the fact that the Chartists stood for election in the first place. As we have seen, Chartism was a movement born of Christian brotherhood and steeped in its language and rhetoric. It is no accident that O'Connor wrote from prison in 1841 that he desired to see each Chartist a good Christian, a good neighbour, and a good friend. But the layer of complexity in the Chartist relationship with Christianity comes in the shape of the established church. The context in which the Chartists who served this church sought to become its church wardens was one in which they sought election to civic institutions. This was, in essence, the problem itself. To the Chartists, the church, by becoming an instrument of the state, had become the cold roof twixt God and man, the obstacle between man and God, just as the nobility and their stooges were the obstacle between man and his rights. So there we have it. One election out of thousands in Chartist history, barely a footnote in the grand scheme of things. But to those of us with an interest in Christian Chartism, it happens to contain within it all the facets of that complex relationship. Chartism was a movement whose religious platform was born out of a relationship with Christ, and whose civic platform reacted against the church as an obstacle thereto. Except in instances such as this, involving church wardens, and radical exceptions like Stephen's, Chartists were men of God, not men of the church. One day, I'd like to find out more about Leeds' Chartist church wardens. But in the meantime, I'm going to pretend I can hear the echoes of Chartist songs bouncing off the walls of this hallowed, beautiful building. Goodbye.
The time shall come when earth shall be a garden of joy from sea to sea, when the slaughterous sword is drawn no more, and goodness exalts from shore to shore. Toil, people, toil, till the world is free, till goodness shall hold thy jubilee, till goodness shall hold thy jubilee.
What's quite exciting here is that we've discovered a relic from the actual Chartist period. This prayer cushion has on it the fleur-de-lis, which, despite its French monarchist connotations, was an extremely popular symbol used by the Chartists on their revolutionary literature and evidently on their prayer cushions. I'm making this up, sorry. It's not true. Probably somebody's prayer cushion.